Hello and welcome to the lecture on what is constructor. So let's understand what is constructor and how we're going to use it and what is the purpose of it. So every class has something called as magic methods which gets called automatically. What are magic methods? Magic methods are methods that is already available for you in the class. In the previous section we saw there's a property called $this which was already available in the class. We didn't define it. We didn't tell PHP to load this $this into our class, but it was readily available to access the object. Similarly, there are some methods which are not visible in the class but already available for us to use. Okay, those are called as magic methods because they are predefined. Whenever you create a class, it's already available for us to use. Okay, so constructors are basically called as magic methods which gets loaded automatically when the instance of a class is created. So this line where you basically write $object is equal to new class name, that's when the constructors are basically executed. And constructors are basically magic methods which is predefinedly available in your program. You can try to write it, and when you write it you don't have to call it specifically. It's automatically been called by the PHP, and when it is called when the instance of a class is created. So you have to remember this. Constructors are magic methods. And how do we call a constructor? So constructor is called when an instance of a class is created. This is a very classic question. Someone will ask you on the definition of what is constructor and when it is called. This is the classic answer for it. Constructors are magic methods. It's called when the instance of a class is created. You don't have to specifically call constructor. It's automatically being called. And the main purpose of constructor is to initialize the properties of the class. You have to remember the purpose as well. Sometimes you try to skip it, sometimes you try to write it. You have to understand why sometimes you have to really use constructor. And the main purpose of writing a constructor in a class is to initialize the properties of a class. Let's say you are writing a bank class, and bank class basically when you create a new account of a bank, the balance you want to have starting with 0 or could be a fixed amount, and that can be controlled from the constructor because that is the initialization of the class. That's where the class objects get created, and when the class objects get created, what are the values that you want to assign to those properties of the class, and that's all handled by the constructor. Okay, so a couple of things you have to remember for constructors. Constructors are magic methods which gets automatically loaded. You don't have to call them specifically, and when they get loaded, when the instance of a class is created. And what is the purpose of constructor? They are used to initialize the property of the class. And one more thing is you can choose to define the constructor method or ignore it because it is optional to define. Previously when we created bank example, employee example, student, and all those examples of classes that we created, we never defined constructor. It was available for us to define it, but we never defined it. So it's an optional that you can choose to define it or you can choose to ignore it as well. Okay, so let's look at an example of how the constructor can be defined. So how to define a constructor? So you have a car class and you have an property name, and the way you define constructor is like this. It's $_ construct is the keyword, and then you define that function, right? You have to use the same name and same notation. Okay, you cannot write something else and call it as a constructor. Whenever you write with $_ and construct, this method will automatically be executed when the instance of a class is created. And this is the prototype of that function. Okay, the arguments are optional and it doesn't return any value. Okay, and remember that it always starts with $_ and the word is called as construct. And whatever you write inside it, mostly you will write code to initialize the properties to a default value. Okay, so _construct is called automatically when a new instance is created and does not return any value, and arguments are optional. Even the function you can choose to define it or you can ignore it. So you have to really remember this concept, and you have to understand when you have to write a constructor, first is how to define it, what are the parameters you want to pass it, and it doesn't return any value. Those are the things that you have to remember when you write a constructor. So let's do an example and understand how do you write a constructor for a class and how it's get executed automatically.